Hey everyone. So my name is Janice. I work for an investment firm called Generate Capital, and I'll be speaking about the innovation on the capital side. I think that's what they want me to talk about, and that's me.
Probably you're next. Go ahead, try it.
Check.
Nope.
No.
Looks like you're going
Maybe.
now.
I'm Deb Friedel, the Director of Sustainability for Delaware North. And just to give a brief background of Delaware North, we are not located in Delaware, so that's kind of a little anomaly. But we're located in Buffalo, New York, a privately held company over the past 100 years in hospitality. So we operate in sporting venues. Locally here in Boston, the company owns the Bruins and TD Garden. We're also coming online at the Boston Airport, so we operate at airport facilities across the U.S., and then also national parks, state parks for our Parks and Resorts division. So I started with the company 15 years ago in Yellowstone National Park. I still live in Bozeman, Montana. I get to travel all over the place right now, which is pretty cool. And then in addition to that, we have gaming facilities. So the company owns and operates a mix of venues here in the United States, but then also we operate into Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Singapore, as well as the UK.
Hi, I'm Ryan Began from Divert, CEO and co-founder. We manage unsold food for major U.S. food retailers across the country, including Ahold, who is here today, and really finding the highest, best use for those food products. So we'll sort of talk through some of that in our approach to finding the best use for those products.
I'm Travis Fry. I'm the VP of Science and Innovation for WISErg. Our major claim to fame at this point is we convert food to fertilizer, but think of us more as a nutrient recovery technology. So we're looking at all different areas that we can sort of upcycle food in different places. So we've got sales of primarily an organic-based liquid fertilizer across the U.S. and into South America.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Keleman, Manager of Environmental Engineering at InSinkErator. Came from the wastewater sector, public sector, almost 20 years. I've now been with InSinkErator nearly 11 years. And I'm here mainly to talk to you about grind to energy and innovation in managing large-scale commercial food scraps, mainly from such places as supermarkets. But there's one installed right here in this area at Gillette Stadium.
Excellent. Well, everybody went?
Good. One more time.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm Nora Goldstein, editor of BioCycle, and pleased to moderate this panel today on, we changed the name of the last, Emerging Solutions Across the Food Waste Recycling Treatment Train. We are going to start with Janice Tran of Generate Capital because in this capacity on the panel, Janice is going to represent perspectives from the investor side, investor perspectives on investing in these innovative technologies for recycling food waste, and also from the operator side, just giving a few minutes of perspectives, just why you're in that and what you do.
So like I said, so Generate Capital are investors in organic waste infrastructure. So we're located in San Francisco, but we invest across the United States and Canada. And so as Nora said, I am representing the capital side, which is a very important part of the equation. Ultimately, none of the solutions get deployed if there's no money behind it. But we also own the infrastructure that we invest in. So specifically in food waste, we're really focused on anaerobic digestion. We have 5 digesters in our portfolio right now in New York, Michigan, in California, and hopefully acquiring a lot more by the end of the year. So I think really quick on the investment side, so there's been a lot of talk about source reduction, kind of more upstream. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a food waste that can't be reduced, or maybe the reduction kind of activities are just not quite as mature yet, and so they end up kind of coming down and you have to decide where does it go, and I don't think anyone here, we wouldn't be here if we wanted it to go to the landfill. And so anaerobic digestion or compost are the alternatives there. From a greenhouse gas and environmental perspective, a lot better than landfill. And we are heavily in the anaerobic digestion space, but what we've seen is, to date, it hasn't kind of hit that tipping point like we've seen in Europe. And I think Generate Capital's perspective, a lot of that has to do with just the maturity of kind of the capital markets and how we view the industry. And that's also influenced by the maturity of policy and the maturity of the developers and food waste producers. And I've had a chance to talk to some of the people in this room, and it's a pretty good representation of the policymakers, all the drivers of the key kind of parts that make a good digestion project. So really quick, the thing that makes a good project investable by us is having a solid off-taker to take the stuff that comes out of it, whether it's gas, electricity, fertilizer, good feedstock producers, and that's food waste generators like large poultry producers to large grocery producers to whatnot, and then having really strong developers that know how to develop a good project, know who to speak to on the permitting side, having the buy-in from the policymakers to get the permitting quickly done, and having the policy to kind of incentivize all the drivers of the market to make a project work. So that's it from the capital side. I think I'm running out of time. I'll pass it on.
Good. Go ahead. Hold on, I have to queue up your slide.
And I'll talk to a number of different types of food waste diversion technology that we've deployed over the course really in the last just under a year. So all of these are pretty new except for the lean path. I'll give a plug out to them. You'll see that at the very end. Of course, one of the first things is measuring our food waste, and we do that at coming online here now with the 6th gaming location, really to try to reduce food waste from the beginning, as well as helping us track our food donations within those facilities. But if you take a look kind of from left to right, I'll speak a little bit about each of these technologies, if that's okay. In October of last year, we installed the Green Mountain Technologies Intermodal Earth Flow, which it's kind of a mouthful, but looks like a Connex unit. It's located in Shenandoah National Park. It was a pretty decent investment for us at this particular location, remote. A few years ago when we started our contract there in 2013, we had the ability with Black Bear Composting to divert our organic waste. Unfortunately, that company went out of business, which is something we've experienced at a number of our locations, and where we operate having limited infrastructure to be able to divert that organic waste. So trying to take the matter into our own hands in this particular situation. It's a seasonal operation in Shenandoah, if you've been there. So really operating pretty much from coming online into March, but April through October, being October the busy season with the leaf keeping season in the Virginia area. But we also not only operate hotel and food and beverage there, but we also have stables. So we produce rich manure, which can also be used into the composting process. So our environmental manager there, really giving credit to him, Scott Stillwagon, did a nice analysis and some good research on what might work best, taking a look at this technology. We're looking at a return on investment in 4 to 5 years, and we can process, really this is our first full season, estimating about 19,000 pounds of food scraps each month, along with 3,000 pounds of manure, which is pretty substantial, again, given that this is a seasonal operation. In addition to that, it required some location. You can tell here that it's not a small operating unit, so logistically speaking, there were some things we had to work through here. The add-on to this, a couple bolt-ons, we put solar to operate the equipment, so it really becomes sort of operating on its own, as well as purchasing a utility vehicle as well to be powered by solar and picking up the organic waste from our operation. So pretty excited about this one. And again, each one of these will be writing case studies and a pilot on the pilots themselves. A couple of others that I'll try to go through quickly. The bio-high-tech technology was also deployed at 3 locations this year. We started off with 2 initially planned. Again, trying to look at key locations where we could install this equipment where it makes sense operationally. Number 1, having the support, and then justifying the means for the equipment and technology. The Ridgeline Hotel, which is located in Estes Park, Colorado, it's an owned asset for us, recently came online. Wanting to do more, again, very remote, without a lot of opportunity for organic waste diversion. We put this in, it's a leased piece of equipment for us over the next 3 years, so which also is very nice, especially when technology is changing. And then we also installed this at Miller Park in April, right after a baseball season started. And then the add-on this year that we weren't quite planning for, but got the support for, was the Gideon Putnam Resort in Saratoga Springs. This particular location also had the ability to divert organic waste, but then the hauler went away. Wanted to continue their program in this with some good success from February to April, and then May at the Gideon installing the equipment. We've diverted about 10,000 pounds from the Ridgeline since February, 11,000 since April at Miller Park, and then 10,000 pounds at the Gideon since May. Now this technology is a little bit different. Question I know for some people is it diverts the organic waste and converts it over to a gray water, which is then plumbed into the sanitary sewer system. I know that it's a little bit of a different means to divert the organic waste, but again, trying to get our arms around a technology and see how that will work for us. So far, it's been very easy, and I will give a plug for the Ridgeline Hotel, the first location where we put this in. Our operators and at the location were so excited. The frontline staff, they named him Doug the Digester. So the great thing about this is you have to continually keep feeding like any of these to make it work, and also to make sure that Doug stays healthy. That ownership locally was really important. So to see that staff engagement's been fun. The food cycler at Kennedy Space Center, unfortunately this one is still in the process of coming online. What happened here is it was a delay in shipping, and then when it came it was damaged, and then when it came again there was a change in location. So some configuration there, they're just bringing this one online. This particular unit converts the organic food waste to a soil amendment, which will then be used in the butterfly gardens there locally on our property by our landscaping division. We're not exactly sure what this is what we're going to generate to process here, but it's planned to take it from at least 3 different food outlets at Kennedy Space Center. And then the SOMAT E-Correct is located at Stella 34 at Macy's in New York City. This has been in operation for a number of years with Patina Restaurant Group, really prior to us coming online and incorporating Patina into our business. But again, it's a piece of equipment that's right there on site and can convert the organic waste into a soil amendment, which what they've done there locally, they've worked with one of the producers, a pig producer who we buy the bacon and then the meats from, who will take that soil amendment and use it at the farm. So that kind of completes the circle there. And then at a couple of other locations where we support our clients, the bio-high-tech digester, a different and bigger version, is installed there at Nationwide Arena. And again, being a food service operator here, we work with our clients to support those initiatives. In this particular case, they actually received the grant for the EPA funding for this, but really we're the producers of the food waste and really kind of have to make sure that we're doing everything we can, not only to divert it, but also to help maintain that equipment. And then lastly, the grind to energy at Progressive Field. Glad to have Michael here as well. Again, the client was the one driving this. It's been a great program for us, diverting about 75 tons of food scraps from Progressive Field. And again, very involved with our operators diverting that waste and managing the process. But it's been a win. So we're excited to kind of share some of our lessons learned and takeaways here. But appreciate the introduction and wanted, kind of excited to share the variety of what we're looking at.
With Delaware North gives you a sense of all the various applications of these on-site systems and where they're sort of niched into the food service operation. So next is Ryan, begin with Divert, and
Sure,
you want to
yeah,
hang upside down?
A little bit. So we started the company in 2007, I guess before food waste was sort of sexy and cool. We originally had a mandate within the company that we were out to solve the wasted food coming out of the back of grocery stores. So we had our first behind the store system where we had a digester built for a Hannaford location in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, that we were taking food waste out of the back of their store, recycling it on site, digesting it, and putting energy into the store, and realized that was a really bad business model for us when we wanted to sort of scale the business. And we sort of looked at the problems that we were solving for our retail partners. Really, it was eliminating the hauler and allowing ourselves to integrate to solve their problems. Grocery stores definitely do not have an anaerobic digester problem. They have a food problem. It is a food loss problem. And so we've matured the business. Now we manage about 4,500 grocery stores across the country in different varying levels of our programs, whether it's tracking cardboard with our IoT platform, or it's building very large-scale anaerobic digesters for Kroger and Ahold. So these solutions have evolved, and as we look at the types of products that we get back, understanding that stores will spend about 5 cents a pound to recycle their unsold food, where that value of product is probably about $1.50. So as we look to scale and grow our business and integrate with our retail partners to solve that wasted food problem from the sourcing side, and really it's about building on that IoT platform that we've developed in partnership with Ahold, and understanding that there is a massive amount of data locked up in what goes unsold, and a story to be told from individual stores, and us being able to collect data. I would say back in 2007 when we started the business, the types of sensors and data infrastructure was not mature enough to support the size operation that we are deploying with our partners. We are there now. We are piloting. We think we are leading the industry, and we think this is where everything is going in terms of recycling really sort of being that end-of-life management. But there is a massive amount of influence we can have with those types of products and understanding how to get that information back into the business in a really efficient way. If you're looking sort of at the retail landscape, what has happened with Amazon Go and moving non-critical functions out of the store, and we really want to support that and understand where the industry is leading. So if we think about what goes unsold and the human behavior elements within those stores, how do we influence that? How do we integrate data in a way that's very useful for our retail partners? And so that's where we see the future of the business.
Travis.
I got mine up.
Oh, so sorry.
Sorry, it's all right.
That's right.
Mine's an easy picture as well. So very similar story to Ryan's. WISErg started about 7-8 years ago, really looking at bioenergy and trying to help these stores almost do the exact same thing. We had a data play and an energy play, and we found very similarly it's not a perfect business model. And one of the things that we discovered out of it was that the data was useful to the grocers and to the companies, but what was really important was, could we find an alternative use? At the time, ADs weren't huge, and so it was something that, how do you take this material and turn it into, and essentially upcycle it? And so that's when we kind of pivoted into this, what we kind of term the sort of nutrient recovery technology, where we're actually trying to convert those nutrients into something that we can actually upcycle to a higher value product. And so that's when we pivoted about 2 to 3 years ago to the fertilizer. And so what we actually produce is an organically certified liquid fertilizer that, as you can see from the yield results, does a really, really nice job in just sort of getting not only nutrients to the plants, both through the roots and also through the plant itself, through the leaves. It also provides a lot of soil conditioning and soil health benefits. So we kind of play in a niche that's a little, it's sort of right after the human edible format. We like to say it's sort of we do flash preservation. So we don't let any of the material putrefy. It's still very fresh, and most of the times when we're getting it, it's still very fresh, and we use an aerobic patented process that basically keeps it stabilized and sort of preserves those nutrients in a form that we can then use. So we're still kind of in this window where the materials that we like to get, we work with our partners, the grocers, to really get that fresher product, but it's sort of either post-human consumption, or if they can't find an outlet for it to get it to a food pantry, we'll find a way to recycle it. And so that's kind of been our big play for the last couple of years. And as I said, we've got distribution all over the U.S., and then it's now moving into South America as well. Now we're kind of looking at kind of what's the next step of upcycling. So we actually are looking at this broth, this nutrient broth that we're producing, and how those nutrients can be leveraged into other products in the market. Ranging everything from animal feeds to you can imagine some of the other areas you can go into when you've got a lot of vitamins and really healthy minerals. There's really no difference in this food. It's not putrefied. It's not rotted. So this is the same material that a week earlier you would have been eating. We've just sort of preserved it almost like a cannery and got it in a position that we can use it for a lot of different things. So that's kind of where we're headed.
Excellent. Thank you. Michael.
So most of you know InSinkErator is the garbage disposal company. Maybe you'll go home and after this you'll call it the food waste recycler.
Yeah.
The way I wanted to start this discussion is to help you understand some perspective. So at the top of the slide you see the pie graph here. We manage most of our food waste as a solid waste. 76% of it's still going into a landfill, even though we have this trend to divert it from landfills. And yet food waste is 70 to 90% water. So the question I would ask you is, why not treat this as a liquid waste as opposed to a solid waste, right? Now, we've been diverting food waste from landfills for 80 years. On the residential side, 50% of the food waste, where it comes from, if you have a disposer in your kitchen, that's one method. And over half of all homes in the U.S. have those. On the commercial side, the institutional side, unfortunately, commercial disposers are usually employed in the dish room. Yet a vast majority of the food scraps produced in the institutional and commercial environment are pre-consumer. And yet in the dish room, you only have access to that 10 or 20%, the post-consumer. So we at InSinkErator looked at what can we do to help capture that larger fraction, the pre-consumer. Well, as it turns out, most of the larger generators are the supermarkets, grocery stores. And so we developed Grind to Energy. So combine this idea that we want to divert food waste from landfills with another mega trend, which I call resource recovery and treatment plants. There's a movement where we've gone from the treatment plant just protecting public health. We've virtually eliminated cholera, dysentery, typhoid, right? I would argue that wastewater treatment is the biggest benefit to public ever because of that. Yet we take it for granted. Over time, we've moved away from calling a wastewater treatment plant a sewage treatment plant or a sanitation plant to a water pollution control plant to a water reclamation plant. Now they're called water resource recovery facilities. They're even being called the water resource utility of the future today by trade associations such as the Water Environment Federation and the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. What they're doing is they're moving towards energy independence, nutrient recovery, and promoting the idea that they've been making clean water all this time as a public sanitation service. In fact, last year, NACWA nominated 79 facilities across the U.S. The middle graph is a snippet of all of the anaerobic digesters across the U.S. This includes AgStar as well as municipal wastewater treatment plants, as well as commercial digesters. And there's about 1,400 or 1,500 of these. And I often hear, well, sending food waste through a disposer to a treatment plant is not going to make energy because not all plants have anaerobic digestion. That is true. Only about 10% in the U.S. do have AD, but they're treating over 50% of the flow. And that's because it's all of your larger cities that have anaerobic digestion. So combine the fact that we've got this movement to become a utility of the future, we want landfill diversion, we developed Grind to Energy, but this is non-sewer based. So now if you look at the right-hand side, instead of sending the food waste through a sewer, we grind it up with a grinder on steroids. It is 10 horsepower, uses very little water, and it sends that food waste into a tank that is then pumped out and hauled directly to anaerobic digesters, on average every 7 to 14 days. And so now we have about 70s across the U.S., including 16 at Whole Foods here in the Northeast. We see our biggest opportunity is in California, Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, obviously where the landfill bans are. And as I said earlier, grocery stores are one of our main customers as of late. But we also have it at Gillette Stadium. As I said earlier, we have it at Progressive Field, Cleveland Indians, and Cleveland Browns. This is an opportunity for revenue generation at wastewater treatment plants or commercial digesters because they charge a tip fee to receive that material. Places like East Bay Mud in Oakland, California are actually producing 200% of their energy needs by bringing in outside food waste. But they're making more money on the tip fees than they are on the energy they're generating. Now, we've been around about 5 years now. I would just say that the main barrier for grind energy is that it's so new and so different, it's hard to get people to buy into it. It's also a little more complicated. You have to coordinate the pumping and the hauling, and you have to have a digester in your area. That's what I call the chicken or the egg. I think one of the speakers alluded to that yesterday. I have customers that want our system, but if I don't have an anaerobic digester in the area, it can be a challenge. And vice versa. I have digesters that want us to deliver our slurry, but we don't have any customers yet. Most of the early adopters, I would say, are in this area as well as southeast Wisconsin, such as Sendik's grocery stores, also El Super and Northgate, Gonzales in the California area. In California, we now have about 14 installations. We're excited about this. We've done a lot of research at both Cornell and Western University to help prove to digester operators that this slurry is good for their operations. And so we're excited about where we're going in the next couple of years.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody, for the, who knows what I just did. For the overview, I'm going to pose a few questions to the panel, and then we're going to open it up, for everybody. But and you have, almost all of you have addressed this a little bit, but in terms of technology deployment and in the marketplace, the challenges and solutions that you've encountered, the challenges you've encountered and how you've had to troubleshoot them and solve them, and the Janice, in your case, you're looking at technology deployment and what's still missing from an investor perspective. So maybe if you go first, and then we'll reverse the order and come back this way. That's
Pressure's on. I'm always going first.
Yeah. You can go last.
It's all good. So Nora, we do look at technology. So I think when you look at capital providers, there's different types of capital providers. There's VCs who kind of come in earlier and they specialize in, investing in new technology in the chance that they'll make $1 billion, and then many of them won't do anything. So we're not VC, we're project finance, which is important to distinguish because we like steady cash flow streams, and we're pretty hesitant on technology. That's not to say that we don't look at a ton of technology, because we do. When you think about where AD and waste infrastructure is going, it's kind of past that point of there's already a lot of great technology, and this panel is testament to that. Technology that's working on the ground right now. The next stage is how do you scale up and get to not just 50 digesters or 100 digesters, but get to 500 digesters, kind of the scale that we're thinking in Europe. And I think Mike definitely alluded to that. There's kind of this barrier. So from the investor's perspective, we don't really see technology, a project investor perspective, we don't see technology as the biggest barrier. It's more about all the other drivers that I was alluding to that is the barrier to that next scale of deployment. And I think this conference is really cool because it's convening all the key players to create that next step. So I think the question is, how do we set up the policy so that we can scale? How do we set up the incentive structures for waste producers to want to install the InSinkErators to want to put out more RFPs so that larger developers can develop those projects so that we can invest in. It's about, on the consumer side, awareness and action on wanting their food waste to not go to the landfills. So I think that is where we see a lot of challenges. But there are some places where it makes sense for us to be in, and that's why where Generate Capital is doubling down on this space. Places like New York, where we have digesters and we're looking to expand more. California is one of those places too, where it's kind of the cocktail of all the aspects of a project make it pretty viable. So I think that's the biggest challenge, but also kind of the biggest opportunity that we see.
I think we'll just go back down this way for simplicity. I always tend to complicate things. So just in your situation, because you deploy a number of technologies in the form of actually either purchasing or leasing them and installing them, what were your biggest, a couple of different stumbling blocks, and then how were you able to address them?
Sure, a couple of aha moments in this process. One, we knew with the bio-high-tech technology, just for the fact that the organic waste was being converted to a gray water, that we needed to check in with the local sanitary sewer districts, the wastewater treatment plants for approval. And that varied at each location. A couple were no problem, go for it. Another location in Wisconsin with Miller Park was not only one level, but another level I didn't see coming. The sewer district was A-okay with it, but then they said, we want the local Department of Natural Resources to take a look at this, which threw me a little bit for a loop just because it's all contained. So it was another level of that approval that took some time and some explanation. But we did get that approval. Another moment of technology and deployment that was a little bit of a challenge for us, especially the beautiful thing is you can monitor and get data with these systems, which is incredibly important to managing a program like this and really kind of testing out the technology. But it was also a little bit of a hiccup for us because number one, we need Wi-Fi capability, and in places like Shenandoah National Park, it's not as readily as available here in a city like Boston. So that was a little bit of a challenge, and then also going through the hoops of our IT with data privacy and security, also connecting to a network, so we're not, opening up another whole can of worms. So getting through that was a little bit of a challenge, but we got there. The nice thing with testing out the technology and starting small is you can learn these lessons and pave the way without it being too big of an issue. And then a couple of other things real quick. Maintenance is an item we've seen with the SOMAT eCorrect a couple of times. When that system goes down, it goes down. So then your organic waste diversion stops until the part and the maintenance can occur to bring it back and online. So that's happened a couple of times with that equipment. And then lastly to that I would say that comes with any organic waste, and the concern up front is, will there be any odor? And I can tell you that at the Ridgeline Hotel, being there a couple of times this year, depending on what the digester is digesting, they had put a bunch of pickles in, and one day it did smell like pickles in the back of the kitchen or back of the house area. So that was kind of funny, but some days it's maybe not as pleasant. Not enough where they've moved it yet, but there's been some talk about now moving that equipment. So you never know what you're going to get. And lastly to that, just from an odor perspective, in a place like Shenandoah National Park, of course, our client is a National Park Service, and wildlife being a very sensitive issue, and protecting the wildlife and not attracting it through any odors. Even though there is a bit of an odor with this particular equipment, we have not seen any issues yet. So I think it's just constant monitoring and really keeping the dialogue going to really ensure that we're on track with that technology and how it's deployed.
Thank you. From a technology hurdle perspective, I think we have matured sort of the digestion side of our business far enough along that we are very comfortable consolidating very large amounts of unsold food from retailers. We do about 500 tons per day across the country. For us, it's the data that we can capture off of those products. And so when we look at the ability to take image processing and develop neural nets to train those technologies to look for specific instances of missteps within a store, and then how do we get that data back into the store. So right now, Walmart, for example, came out with their Eden product. They're looking at food that they are receiving. They are using a vision platform to train their algorithms. Right now, they're advertising savings in the tens of millions of dollars, and they see this opportunity to create billions of dollars of savings within their supply chain. We're sort of working on the other end of this. We're in a very unique position that because we handle so much unique unsold food from so many unique retailers across the country, we do centralize all of these materials, that deploying that sensor network and our ability to train those neural nets faster than anybody else in the market, we really see as a distinct advantage. Google has recently released TensorFlow, which is the same platform, neural net platform that they have used to create Google Vision. But the issue is within the world of image processing. If you're looking at Google image and you're Googling Apple in image, for example, they do have the algorithms tuned so that they can recognize an apple, but that apple has to be found on a tree, in a lunchbox, on a table, whereas in our specific instances, we're looking for conditions of text recognition of the PLU code off of that apple. Is an apple bruised? What type of apple is it? And then if we're getting really complex, is it a traditional versus organic? So really using the data that's available from those products. So when an apple leaves the back room of a store, we can actually understand and give that information back to our retailers. So that information network is recently maturing, and so it's about leveraging that in a very quick way so that we can outpace our competitors who may end up being future customers as well.
All the above that was just said. I mean, I think we've met all those same hurdles and challenges and opportunities that we've had to go through. I think some of the things that, as you start thinking about a company and sort of how you get to the magic of profitability, some of it is perception, and can you do this at cost? It's very expensive to haul solids, haul liquids. I mean, most of what we do with liquids, to Mike's point, you're hauling around a lot of water. So you end up dealing with having to sort of reinvent some of the ways that you handle things so that you can reduce those costs quite a bit. I think the biggest challenge we've been dealing with as we think about expansion, because we're trying to move products up the continuum versus down. And so when stuff's sort of hidden away and consumers aren't necessarily touching it, they're less concerned about calling it waste. If you start saying, we're going to look at this for pet food or other types of things, or even fertilizers that they're going to use in their own yards and things like that, they don't like the word waste. We don't use the word waste. I've had to adapt here because waste is a really important word here. But we really think about it as it is a nutrient that we're trying to harvest. And so we really don't think in terms of waste. We think about it in terms of recycling. And so I think educating customers and consumers as to the value of that upcycling event is really, really important. It's probably been one of the biggest challenges for us, even at the farmer level, when they're saying, okay, I get to choose between a really nutritious, organic soil amendment and plant fertilizer versus something has health concerns like manures or acidulated fish, which is another option. But those are kind of the two options, and when they're faced with it and they're saying, okay, I can put a manure on a crop that may cause some pathogens to be at a higher level than normal versus something else, they're still looking at that cost. There's still not a driver to them yet to say, I'm willing to pay a few cents more to apply something that's safer for the environment, safer for my crops. They're willing to take the risk, and I think getting that conversation in front of them to say, hey, this really is going to return longer-term value to you, both from a risk mitigation perspective and from a long-term soil health and environment. That value prop around environmental sustainability we're still trying to define. So I'd say that's probably our biggest challenge to date.
So I'll just list a couple of things. As was mentioned, water is a big issue. It's expensive to haul. But you want at least 10 to 12% solids to make a food waste slurry pumpable. And so we, over time, have modified our system to only add water when it's necessary. A commercial disposer, for example, may use as much as 7 to 8 gallons a minute because it's transporting the food waste through a sewer. Residential disposer would use about 1.5 gallons per minute. Grind energy uses about 1 GPM, and that's really only when it's necessary to actually keep that slurry moving in through our peristaltic hose pump to put it in the tank where it's then pumped and hauled. That reduces your overall cost for hauling that material. And by comparison, an anaerobic digester, they're pumping solids into their digester at around 2 to 3% solids. So the treatment plants are listening to me saying, you're bringing in 10 to 12% solids? That's high for them. But I have to let them know that it's pumpable, and as soon as they get a load, they want to know when they're going to get more. Which alludes to the second biggest challenge. My team has gone back and forth with me over the last 5 years in that whether or not we deal with commercial digesters or municipal wastewater treatment plants. I was bully on wastewater treatment plants, right? The commercial ADs want feedstock. In fact, they ask us to sign contracts that we're going to guarantee them certain volumes. But they want to charge us about 4 to 5 times what a municipal wastewater treatment plant will. Wastewater treatment plants aren't going anywhere. Their infrastructure is largely paid for, and so they can afford to charge a much lower tip fee. And in most cases, the municipal treatment plants are only charging 1 to 3 cents per gallon. Whereas we've had some commercial digesters that are saying we want 15 to 20 cents per gallon, and we just end up not dealing with them. So it's a big variance.
Okay, I think, thank you all. Let's see if there are any questions. Go ahead.
I've got 3 questions for 3 of the panelists. Debbie, any of the technologies that you talked about, are any of them dehydrators? And if so, is the final product stable once it comes out? Because I've heard stories of some dehydrators, the product, if it touches water, stuff kind of gets reactivated. So that's your question. Travis, I heard you talk about the liquid portion, liquid fertilizer. What do you guys do to focus on kind of the solids portion of whatever you're processing? And for Michael, the grind energy, for a grocery store, we have an AD facility in Connecticut now. A lot of grocery stores are transporting their produce directly there, whatever they can.
Quantum?
Yeah. So would this technology be used for people who are close to the facility, who are now just transporting produce as is there, or would it be more, a grocery store front at least, intended for people who are further away?
So typically, our generators that are our customers are within 30 to 40 miles. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to drive a very long distance with liquid waste, even though we're only doing that every 7 to 14 days with the typical grocery store. The way some digesters are handling that is they're pre-processing at the facility. So they bring in source-separated organics. In fact, this is being done at some treatment plants. And then they pre-process it, make it into a slurry. Waste Management has their core system. That's what's being done in New York, New Jersey, as well as LA. The problem is, it's not uncommon for some of these pre-processing places to get 20 to 30% contamination. And so they have to have very specialized, expensive equipment and maintenance issues to try and get that material out before it's ready to put in the digester.
I'm assuming for you, the question you were asking for solids, you're talking about food solids, correct?
Correct.
Okay, because the plastics and things like that, we work with our partners to eliminate on the front end so we don't have to deal with it. But we basically digest. It is digest. We use an anaerobic process. So we have some fun bugs that we put in there, and they basically process the material and break it down, and then that actually goes into as the base component within the fertilizer. So that actually, the liquid fraction itself actually comprises the sort of nutrient-rich, immediately available nutrients that you can actually spray over the top for the plant that will absorb right through the leaves. It also supplies the roots with a readily available source. And then the solids actually provide sort of the soil conditioning, the carbon and the components that actually break down over time and give that longer-term nutritional quality, and then also the soil health. So it kind of has those two components, but for the most part, we break it down through that processing step to a very small. It has to essentially, to go out into the field, it has to go through typically a 50 micron filter. If it can't pass that, it won't go through irrigation. So that's how small we get it down to.
The food cycler hasn't completely been brought online, but it is a soil amendment, and the way we're dealing with that is our landscaping department will be mixing that in with some other soil on site. We do have not, we haven't applied it, so we just want to make sure that, the concern is that it may cause some odor possibly, so we have to be very careful with that. The SOMAT E-Correct, as that soil amendment goes out to the producer, again, being mixed in kind of on the farm. I haven't had any feedback yet from that producer because I haven't spoke directly to them, but they seem to be continuing to accept it, so it works.
From a compostable bag standpoint, is there any kind of solution in terms of like the small scale Debbie kind of things? Is there any kind of solution for those? Like, can you process those through those machines?
That's a good question. This is one where the food cycler is supposed to be able to take, again, having not tested it out yet, it's supposed to take some compostables, a select type. We'll find out, but again, the mix of it cannot be more of that versus food scraps. Otherwise, it kind of disrupts the system. But otherwise, the intermodal earth flow can take the compostables as well. But the bio-high-tech seed or the sprout cannot, and the SOMAT E-Correct cannot.
Let's see, first Jasmine, we'll go back and then thing over here.
Mine's sort of a two-part question. For those of you who have customers, what are their motivations, and are you able to show them a return on investment? In San Diego area where I come from, the tippage fee for a ton of waste is $40. So we have a hard time. I'm a nonprofit, so we're not in the same business as you, but it's a hard time making that case for them.
Yeah, but I think that's a great question. At Shenandoah, it pencils out quicker for us because we're further away, so the hauling costs go up. But even in some of our locations like the Ridgeline, and the Gideon being in some city areas, we'll probably be relatively close to flat in evening out. Kennedy Space Center, even though it's in Florida and you think there'd be more opportunity, it's just far enough away that it will be the first of its kind on NASA Center to actually recycle food. And then even in New York City, just the way the waste is managed and garbage pickup and no space, that becomes a real big issue. So sometimes it's dollars and cents is a part of it, but also operationally how it can help us reduce the space. But we'll still have more to come to really pencil out the numbers, but it's an important factor to keep in mind, and we're definitely looking at that.
Anybody else on how you compete with that?
For us, it's cutting out transportation, leveraging reverse logistics for our customers, consolidating, creating economies of scale, and then leveraging external additional infrastructure. So we do have pre-processing facilities in Portland, Oregon, Bakersfield, Pennsylvania, servicing roughly another 1,000 stores out of those facilities. So these are pre-processing, we're liquefying, we are removing packaging for our customers. There are labor savings within the stores, and when we look at the back end, our ability to bring our technology and how we manage our digesters and bring that to our partner digesters, opening up capacity that is not available to others. So we do this in the Pacific Northwest, work with one of the largest organic farmers. They are taking what we bring over to them, producing a drip quality fertilizer that they can use on their organic farmland, roughly 8,000 acres. And so the value proposition there is we're bringing that fertilizer offset for their farm back into the tip fee that we pay for the liquid feedstock that we're delivering. So it's really leveraging existing infrastructure as much as we can and cutting out waste in all forms, labor, transportation, et cetera.
And for us, we don't really make any money off the tipping fee at all. We typically, in order to get them to give it to us, we actually charge less, and then we actually make the money on the back end on the product. And that's kind of our business model, is that we're not necessarily trying to compete with an AD or a composting. We're looking at higher value add products that we can actually return that value back. And because we see this as, at some point, I think the industry will get to the point where you know, these sources of materials may or may not come free, like they may be now, or at a reduced cost, and so we will eventually have to probably pay if we want to have a sustainable model. So how do you make this valuable to, because this is also, I mean, you think about the Walmarts and the Costco's and even the small mom pop grocers, this is a big component of cost that's just going out the back door that they're actually paying for. So not only are they not making money, they're actually losing money. And so, you know, we're looking at it as a way to return value back to the chain. And so if we can produce value on the back end and we can return some of that value, it helps them do other things more efficiently. It helps them maybe help with some of the donations of that fresher material that can go to feed people. They actually can then afford to maybe transport it. So we're looking at this as again, it's a big cycle, and if we can return value back to that stream, that chain, it kind of trickles down. So we're hoping that's the direction we're going to go.
Speaking first about San Diego, we wish we could deliver to Point Loma, but they don't want trucks going out there to the treatment plant, and so that's not going to happen. We've had a number of customers that have wanted our system in San Diego, and yet we don't have an anaerobic digester. With regard to your question on cost effectiveness, I would point to a place like Sendix in Milwaukee, who said, we're just doing this because we think it's the right thing to do. And I got to tell you, if you're in the Midwest and you're only paying $30 or $35 a ton to put it in a landfill, it's a tough sell. What we're doing, you have to manage the pump outs, not just the system and the installation and the servicing, the pumping, the hauling, and the tip fees. It can be expensive. And then as soon as you think it's competitive in a place where you have a landfill ban, say in the Northeast here, where you may be paying $150 a ton or $100 a ton, then the hauler comes in and wants to charge you $300 or $400 an hour, and suddenly we can't even compete. We can't even put in a system. So it's complicated. All I can say is that it varies from region to region.
Janice, did you want?
Yeah, I can speak to some of that.
I think they work now.
So the way that we, like as investors, the way that we see the projects is it's not just tip fee. So tip fee is one part of it. $40 doesn't seem like it's not a deal killer. So there's tip fee, there's offtake, so electricity or gas or maybe even bioplastics, and then there's the effluent. So if you can, as WISErg was saying, if you can make it into a fertilizer, some type of value product, then that boosts the overall economics. So I would say, when we look at a region, San Diego, anywhere else, we just look at how are the markets for those three aspects playing out, and usually it can work, but then in the areas where it doesn't, maybe grants come in and that can pull it into the right direction.
Great. Sean, did you, and then Josh?
Debbie, I want to say I really appreciate your observations and thoughts, and I wanted to ask two questions. One, on the biodigester side, whether your experience changing out the grease interceptors has been what you anticipated, or if you had to change them out more than you expected or less. And then the second was for the larger venues, stadiums that maybe have a larger portion of post-consumer waste in the front of house, what the strategy for food waste management there, or if it's the next horizon and compostable packaging is in the works.
Yeah, so before we installed the bio-high-tech technology, like at Ridgeline Hotel, Gideon Miller Park, especially at Ridgeline, the local wastewater treatment plant told us we needed to have an inspection of the grease trap. So that was another thing that was asked, and we haven't had any issues or problems, but we did have to make sure that we had the grease trap installed, because that's an important part of the process also. So nothing yet really to report there. Things seem to be functioning sort of as business as usual. So far, so good. And then on the the food service side from a stadium, just real quick on a couple of things we've done. Again, the beautiful thing about even having this technology in place, and we have a food donation program in play, but then also looking further upstream, our chefs have been really taking a closer look at food waste just from the pre-consumer side, what we can do by training our culinary staff and just how they cut a carrot. As simple as that, like cutting the tip of the carrot. And many people don't do it very wisely. They're wasting a lot. So just showing people how to do that, or going to the source and ordering carrots where we don't have to cut the top off. Simple things like that just to reduce food waste. And then our food donation program, we really got into monitoring that. That was a big push last year. The company had a food donation program, and I moved into this role last year. I was asked for metrics, and I was asking for metrics. And metrics were a little bit all over the board initially until we could, again, put out a communication and give people that expectation of this is what we need to be looking at. And once we got that number last year and then looked at the number from 16 and then to 17, one of our locations was significantly down in food donations, and it raised a few eyebrows as to what happened here. And what happened was the chef actually looked further upstream and saw that we were way overproducing. And that was actually at Miller Park in the concessions. So dialing that in not only had an impact on significantly reducing food waste, but also food costs. So looking at that. And then, of course, the lean path piece of it, working with Andrew and his team that's at our gaming locations and putting these into the main kitchen area where we have buffets, and really seeing some incredible results in savings by deploying that in just even the first year. But we're continuing in growing that program with Lean Path. So a couple of things there is the visibility and the hands-on with our frontline staff. I can't tell you how important that is. And a lot of times, we've got goals and you've got technology, but until you can get those frontline people, Andrew and I were talking about that earlier, they're our number one customer when it comes to really any of this, to get them to understand what, why, and once we kind of report back and get them engaged, it's an incredible culture change. So right there in of itself is impressive, but it's also kind of fun at the same time because people understand it, and really it's meaningful long term. And I think one last thing is it contributes to just overall morale and some engagement in a way that maybe you can't calculate in a return on investment with tipping fees and things like that.
I have a similar question to Chris's, which is like for each of you something, or mostly something. So Brian, I wanted to know about backhauling, if that's what you're using as your main hauling. Like, so the Kroger grocery store brings the pallets in, and then they backhaul the cardboard and the food waste and the Gaylords. Is that how that works for you to haul for the material you're taking?
That's a general explanation, yeah. I would say it's FSMA compliant. From our perspective, it is unsold food at that point.
Yeah.
It has not become food waste until we pull data off, but logistically, yeah.
Got it. And then for all three of you on the end, can you talk about your client interface around the packaging and well, two things. One, the ultimate back-end product and plastic contamination. So digester, ground up stuff. How much do you think is in there when things get ground or when things get pulped? How much plastic waste do you think you have? That may vary. Can you comment on that? And then if you and it's kind of this wiser to you, if you instruct people to source separate at the beginning, like what's the barrier there? Because that's a lot of work.
So we're not a digester, so we don't have quite the we don't have any contamination. Or if we do, it's almost non-existent because of the partnership we have on the front end. And the way that we do that to make it easy is, we provide the containers, our digesters, for lack of a better term, I like to call it cold brewing because it's basically kind of sitting and stabilizing, but they're right on site. So instead of the individual, typically what they would do is they'd fill a container and then they would take it out back and toss it into a dumpster. They take it out back to our harvester, they type in the type of material, and then it basically gets auto stabilized within our harvester. And so there is no packaging at that point. Most of the stuff that's coming out of the store has just been, they take it and they're recycling already, so they're taking that plastic and they're putting it in their recycling container and they're just dumping the fruits and vegetables and meats and everything in our container. So we have very little. It is a... They
literally depackage the bacon and the hot dogs and the ground beef. They literally
depackage it, yeah. Because it's such a huge savings for them because they're not having to pay that giant tipping fee. So in a sense, we're paying for it because we're not charging them as much as they normally would get charged for the tipping fee. But because we provide the the containers and the functionality of the system is so automatic. It's actually easier for them because they're not even having to lift anything into a dumpster. It literally just, they pull it up and it automatically dumps. That is a bigger concern with our more centralized system, where you are having more of those plastics come in, and it's really up to the people that are doing the separation as to how good they do it, because they're dealing with much larger volumes. So when you start to get to, these guys can talk about it, when you get to the scale that they're working at, in some of the larger consolidated systems, then yeah, contamination is a much more challenging. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but I'm sure we will.
So similar to your garbage disposal in your home, people are reluctant to allow stuff to get down there because they don't want to have to turn it off and put their hand down there and pull it back out, right? So with that in mind, I would say there's a big reluctance for somebody to want to put their hand down a 10 horsepower unit. Having said that, each department at a grocery store, like the fruits and vegetables, a produce section, will bring back bus tubs full of their material. So it's pretty clean when it gets put in the bus tub. But then when it gets to the Grind Energy station, it's a stainless steel table, and they have the ability to dump that out. And then if there's any twist ties, plastic bags, gloves, or whatever that happen to be there, they still have another opportunity to remove that before it goes in the disposer. We look at our percent volatile solids. It's typically above 90%. I mean, 90 to 92%. Yes, plastics burn, but if you had metals or glass, that would show up as an inert and would be non-volatile. So I typically use the volatile solids as a measure of whether or not you have contamination.
Time for one more question.
Janice, you said, you pointed out that the two main options for keeping food out of landfills being commercial composting and AD. I was curious why you've invested more in AD than commercial composting. And then I guess related to that, if there is more time, Deb, I'd love to hear your thought process in areas where you do have access to a commercial composter that will accept food scraps and packaging, kind of how you do that analysis of your approach.
No, good question. So we do invest in compost. We look at it, so we don't have anything against it. The reason why we're looking more at AD is because there's more you can do with it. You can usually they have a power purchase agreement. There's certain types of incentives, electricity or RNG incentives in the U.S. that you can take advantage of. So there's just kind of more that you can do with it. It's also less of a developed industry, and so for an investor like Generate Capital, or we like to open up markets, not just go into already developed commoditized ones. But with that being said, there's a lot to do in compost as well. There's a lot to do on the making value. I think where both compost and AD needs to go is creating the value from the fertilizer, which that's what WISErg is working on. So the moment that we have that, you're going to just see an upshoot on both.
We have time.
Try to make this brief. Yes, composting and working through a local facility is preferred first and foremost if we have that available to us, which we do at a number of locations like Petco Park, Claylock Lodge, which is again very remote, but there happens to be a prison in the middle of nowhere, not all that far. It's about a 45-50 minute drive where we can collect and they take our organic waste for compost. And then Target Field, again, there's infrastructure there, so we have the ability to do so. Honey Creek Resort in Iowa and a number of other locations, we have that ability, so that's preferred first. And then, again, looking at trying to take a little bit more control and testing out these technologies have been kind of our approach, just to see what's best. One of the questions I think that's hardest is, well, which ones, is there any one innovation that will kind of fit all of our needs? And I haven't seen one yet, just because of the uniqueness of where we are located, whether it's legal requirements, operational requirements, what the client's looking at, all of those things kind of factor in. But ideally, we would love for a compost facility to be nearby at all of our locations, if possible. But that would be Deb's perfect world.
Great. So I think we should probably end, just because we're going to move right into the closing plenary, right? So thank you very, very much.